Unicorn Overlord is one of my most anticipated games this year for a lot of different reasons, and they dropped a gigantic demo on the Nintendo Switch. And after having soaked way more time than I expected to into this thing, there's a lot I want to talk about, and there's just so much more about this title that I'm in love with. So first off, in case you haven't looked too in depth at this game, and also the reasons why I'm personally just so excited for it in the first place, this is the next game coming from Vanillaware, which as a dev has a pretty mixed history of titles as far as genre and styles go. They've just always been quality, with some of the more recent ones I think worth pointing out if you're familiar with them would be things like 13 Sentinels Aegis Rim and Dragon's Crown. So that's one reason I'm immediately interested, because Vanillaware just makes quality stuff. But the other reason why is that this particular title is capturing a style of strategy RPG that we just don't really see super often. I feel like most times when people talk about the strategy RPG nowadays, the immediate default thought for a lot of people is turn-based grid-style combat. Things like Fire Emblem, Final Fantasy Tactics, more recently Triangle Strategy, all wonderful games and another version of the genre that I absolutely love, whereas Unicorn Overlord is instead pulling a lot more from Ogre Battle, a series that we haven't seen since the N64. If you're not familiar with the series, the main idea here is that you have battles taking place on a fairly large size map, sometimes smaller ones. They are actual real-time battles that you do, but the main part that a lot of the RPG aspect comes into play towards is that you deploy squads of units that you build yourself out, and then if those units attack other units, it goes to a separate battle screen where they automatically handle battle based on those particular squads' compositions. It can seem a little simple at first glance, especially because you don't have direct control over how these battles play out, like picking specific targets, but there's actually a lot that goes into not only the strategy of your positioning and placement of units, but also in just how you build out these squads in the first place. Now, the way this demo plays out is that you are basically just starting a brand new fresh file as if it was the full version of the game, and after you work your way through the opening plot bits and some of the opening tutorials and you hit the point where the gameplay actually opens up, you're given a 5-hour timer that, as far as I can tell, only counts actual gameplay time. It does not include cutscenes, because I ended up walking away with save files as large as 8 hours. And so basically you can just keep playing the game until you hit that 5-hour mark of gameplay, or if you finish up what basically feels like the first really big story mission that's basically a closing to the game's first act, then the demo will end. And you're able to take all the save files that you take from this demo and bring them to the full version of the game so you can pick up right where you left off. Now, the way the gameplay flow works out outside of just having your major combat battles is that you're actually dropped on a world map that you're able to explore and walk around in non-linear fashion. There are specific storyline missions that you are meant to do in order to progress the story, but as far as just exploring the map goes, there's a whole different variety of routes that you can take to get to those story missions, and as far as I can tell, there seems to be no kind of time limit or punishment for taking your time, so you can really thoroughly explore every nook and cranny and do as many quests and battles and optional things as you want in order to amass your army by getting more units, getting better gear, leveling up your characters, etc. There is a lot that goes into this. There are all kinds of different aspects that you build up and level up your army in different ways, not only in terms of literally leveling up your units and giving them better gear, but even in the way they're able to set up your party by spending special resources to increase the number of squads you can deploy in a map, as well as how large each of those squads can be, starting off with only 2-man teams, but eventually looking like they can get as large as 5. Within the scope of the demo, by near the very end of it, I was able to get a couple squads up to being 4-man teams, which were way more powerful than what I had at the start of it. Now, in terms of what characters make up these armies, there is a large cast of named characters that you're able to recruit just by playing through the story and completing different quests and missions, but if you want, you can also supplement this with nameless customizable mercenaries. These are basically customizable characters that you can pay resources for to recruit into your army, and this allows you to have a lot more fine customization over how your party is built out. While the named characters can encompass a wide variety of different classes, you might find yourself in situations where you wish maybe you had more archers, more mages, more of a particular class, and so mercenaries give you a way of being able to do that. And what's really interesting about these is that not only can you hire them to fill out your army, but they are completely customizable, not just in the sense of picking their appearance from different color options, but also by being able to customize their actual stats and growth rates so you can position them towards specific playstyle. styles. Unit variety is really important because it's actually one of the big crux moments of how combat in this game works out and where a lot of the challenge comes from. It's not immediately apparent when you first start up, but how you actually plan out your squads and what you fill them with has a massive impact on the difficulty of particular maps. There's a fairly complex rock, paper, scissors element going on where different units have strong advantages against other unit types. So depending on what you find yourself going up against on a particular map, you might find you need a lot of anti-armor units. You might find you need a lot of horse-riding knights to cover a lot of land. You might find that having archers and mages is really useful because they're special watchtowers you can have them go up to and rain attacks on enemies from a distance. Something that I found really interesting about the way Vanillaware chose to tackle combat in this game is adding a couple additional restrictions that make it just a bit more difficult for you to try and plow through groups of enemies with overpowered units, and it's primarily through its stamina system and time limit. The stamina system is basically every squad has so much stamina that restricts how often they can act, where once they've done so many attacks or actions in a row, they have to stop and rest or use items or some way to recover their stamina. And if they're attacked while in this state, they are extremely vulnerable to enemies and much more likely to get wiped out. Now, on its own, this is an interesting way of making sure that you don't rely on just one singular super strong squad, but what it plays really well with is also the game's use of a time limit. Every single map, every single battle has a time limit that it has to be finished within, and depending on the size of the map or what the particular challenge is, it can end up being a very short period of time or something that is meant to be a pretty prolonged battle. It seems like the time limit is for the most part forgiving enough that you can play things a little safe and take your time, learn from mistakes, that kind of thing, but you really cannot afford to be purely on the defensive or really just taking your time slowly covering everything on the map. You need to have at least some degree of aggressive stance to make sure you clear things in time, because I will say, playing the game on its normal difficulty, I never actually had any problems fighting any battles that were my level as far as, being defeated by too tough of enemies. That was never too big of an issue, but what I did end up getting a game over from a couple times was where I was maybe just not quite as assertive as I should have been, and even though I was doing really well on the map, ended up not clearing it in time and got a game over. This to me, especially paired with the fact that units have to rest every now and then if they're acting too often, really ends up playing the biggest role of upping the tactical feeling of the game. Oftentimes in certain tactics titles, it can get very easy if you rely on overleveling certain units and then taking a safe and careful approach of only cornering certain enemies here and there and working your way through the map, whereas this is giving you a very clear reason why you can't always do that, and you need to make sure that you're quickly and intelligently picking where you want to deploy units in what order, picking where you're sending them to, and making sure that none of them are getting too tired that it slows down how quickly they can make their approach. This ended up making the early and kind of midpoint maps of the demo pretty sufficiently challenging fairly often. I will say near the end of the demo, I did end up having a bit of an easier time on the normal difficulty, primarily because even though, yes, those are things that I had to consider and keep track of, because I took my time clearing out as many quests as I possibly could, I ended up having an army of very powerful, over-leveled units compared to what I was going up against for the storyline missions. And as far as I can tell, there seems to be no real punishment for doing that. The only thing is that if you have a particularly high-leveled unit wipe out a lower-level enemy unit, you just don't really get any XP. So it slows down maybe how much XP gain your overall army is getting, but as far as punishing you for maybe using way too strong units, not really. So if you take your time really building your army up and then go to lower-level missions, you're more than likely going to just steamroll through them unless you're picking a lot of really bad squad matchups to the specific type of enemies you have to handle or take down. There are a couple other little interesting mechanics and things that come up in the demo. There are towns that you can help rebuild by donating resources that you find on the world map, and it allows you to unlock certain items and shops or being able to take ships to other locations on the world map. And there is an affection system where units that fight side by side more often are able to become more and more friendly, which may unlock special dialogue depending on specific pairs. In the case of the main character, you get dialogue with basically everyone you recruit aside from the random customizable mercenaries. And when you have units that are on good terms with each other fighting side by side in a team, they're going to get stat boosts that make them even more effective. One of the interesting other things about squad makeup, by the way, is that while at first glance it looks like you might not have the most refined control over how combat works, because again, it's automatically handled once two units engage each other, there's actually an AI system you can engage with for customizing specifically how your units choose to act. So an example given specifically by the game is that the main character has a move where if they use that move and finish off an enemy, they regain health. So you can set set it up to where whenever they use that move, they prioritize targeting the enemy with the lowest health, so there's a better chance of that occurring. So there's all kinds of ways that you can fine-tune the behaviors of your party to where, while you still can't make any last-second changes or choices of what you want them to do, you can set them up for best behaviors and practices for how you want that squad to act. And I can't begin to emphasize enough how important squad makeup is. Like, your actual tactical decisions on the battle map are of course important, but if your squads are not set up in a way that is effective or efficient, you're just giving yourself an uphill battle to deal with. There are also a couple other fun little things you can do in the demo. For instance, there are mini games to help you collect more resources, like running around mining for stone, and one of the mainstays of Vanillaware games, there is a tavern where you can see some very deliciously animated looking food, and it basically serves as one of the main ways that you can help build relationships between teammates outside of just having them fight together all the time. So if you want to unlock a lot of dialogues, or there's maybe two characters that you want to start having fight side by side that you haven't had do that yet, and you want to give them a little head start on building up their relationship, that's a way you can do that. Aside from all the gameplay mechanics, a couple of things worth touching on. As far as the storyline and writing goes, it's fine so far. It is a fairly generic opening startup for this style of strategy RPG. There's a big bad evil general who has taken over a bunch of the world. You're playing as the wayward prince of a conquered kingdom who's trying to reclaim their homeland. There's some evil magic stuff involved on the side. Nothing here is particularly groundbreaking yet. I think there's definitely some room for things to get more interesting, maybe in the back half, and have some additional revelations. But as far as just the writing and storyline goes so far, fairly straightforward stuff. What does stand out alongside this, though, is that, like with many other Vanillaware games, the art in this game is just simply beautiful. Character designs, monster designs, the world map, the foods you can eat at the tavern just look incredible. And the music accompanying it, the score is fantastic, with one of my favorite pieces being right at the start of the demo with one of the tutorial story fights, basically the very first one you do in the game. Honestly, with how massive this demo is, it is a great way of finding out immediately whether or not this is a game that's going to click for you or not. And I think it's a very intentional choice on Vanillaware's part. This is definitely a very specific kind of game made by a studio that has a dedicated fan base, but maybe isn't the most widest of reaching of audiences. And this is a very meaty way to find out whether or not this next game is for you. I highly recommend checking it out. And while there is a lot more that we can learn from the full version of this game, I am now completely hooked, and this is an instant buy in my mind, no hesitation. Whether or not that might change with the full version of the game, and maybe the back half of it really sours the whole experience for me, don't know yet, but I'll let you guys know once that full version comes out. So those are my thoughts on the Unicorn Overlord demo. It's just an absolutely massive playable piece of the game, and I recommend giving it a shot if you haven't yet. If you're interested in seeing my future coverage of some other games as well as the full version of this one, make sure to subscribe to this channel. I have a lot of plans to resume doing stuff here and not just on the main channel this year. It's gonna be busy, but it's gonna be worth it, and I will see you guys later.